Hi, my name's Doctor Hussain. I'm one of the yellow jersey British Triathlon Age Group ambassador, and I'm here to interview Doug Jones, the Red Bull UK Health and Performance Director.
Hi, my name's Doug Jones. I'm a chartered physiotherapist. I own Altius Healthcare and I'm the Health and Performance Director for Red Bull UK.
So we're here on behalf of Riixo Recovery, and I think the whole aim of what I want to get out today is an understanding of what we can do, one, to really maximise our training to get the most out in terms of performance, as well as the important element of recovery, which I think often gets overlooked. Thank you, Doug, so much for giving up your valuable time to share. And I've got quite a few questions from athletes and age groupers, as well as a few from myself, if you don't mind. So, if you start with Katie, her question is around, she wants to know how she can maintain short race distance speed and sharpness while also increasing training volume, because she wants to also try to compete in longer endurance races. But it's difficult, isn't it, against the balance of increased injury risk and overtraining. To sort of that age grouper that wants to develop that sort of speed for shorter distance, but endurance for the long stuff, what kind of words of wisdom do we got?
Yeah, well, you're saying I see a lot of people like this in clinic, and they're trying to get a PB, and I think a lot of the mistake people make is quite a short-term approach, and what they want to do is get the maximum benefit out of their training, and often they can cut corners, and I think a lot of people, you associate injury risk when you change anything. So you add in intensity or you increase mileage. And I think the easiest way and the safest way to do that, if you add something, you've got to take something away. And what I mean by taking something away, you add in recovery. So the recovery will combat the increase in intensity or increase in mileage. My profession, I'm not a professional in strength and conditioning or coaching, but I know in the elite setting a lot of people base the foundation of training on intervals, because what you can do is put speed in, put intensity in, and increase your mileage, but all you do is change the length of the interval intensity. So a lot of people talk at 3-5 minutes above and beyond their sweet spot. And what you've got to do is be really, really careful with not putting too much intensity. And the way you can monitor that is, your intensity indicators, which is your heart rate, your wattage, and then, measure the effects of exercise. So how long it takes to recover before you do your next effort.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I think often when you're trying to train, it needs to be focused towards a goal, doesn't it? Because if you then want to, for example, achieve a Olympic distance triathlon PB as well as an Ironman, there's different physiological requirements in there, and as you say, sometimes just going for short-term wins isn't the right thing, so you need to embed those elements. Brilliant, thank you. And Doug, for athletes that are quite new to intervals, that maybe want to start incorporating it into their routine, any kind of tips that you would suggest when they're starting off?
I think it's important when we're talking about preventing injury, and when you put intervals into any program, what you're doing is you're playing with intensity.
Yeah.
And often if you're going to add intensity, then you've got to increase the rest between the intervals. So normally if it's a 30-second effort, you'd follow that by double the recovery. Yeah. So you'd look at a minute's rest, which could be a jog or walk, but I think it's useful to have monitoring in place. So use your heart rate as an indicator. You can use longer than a minute, but get your heart rate down to something that's ready to go again. So I would, if I'm doing Ironman training at the moment, my intervals would be 3 minutes of effort, and I'd be doing a minute rest. But when I first started, I'd be doing a minute effort and 3 minutes rest. Yeah. And my 3-minute rest would be longer if I couldn't get my heart rate down. And obviously, as you increase the number of intervals, it takes longer for you to recover.
I think that's spot on. as time goes on, that rest shortens and shortens to a point where you're still achieving the same heart rate drop, but as obviously you become more trained, that happens quicker. I think that's really well said. We've got a question here from Don, and he goes, does Doug think you can have a busy race schedule while also remaining competitive? For example, can too many races start to take sort of a burden on your performance and on your sharpness? Because, for example, he struggles with, if he has too many races, he's constantly tapering, and so therefore struggling to actually build kind of focused training into the block. What thoughts do you have there?
Well, I think everybody's an individual, and a lot of people can cope with a busy race calendar and others can't.
Yeah.
And so I don't think one approach fits all. In the elite setting, you know, the race schedule or the fixture calendar is getting busier and busier. There's various stakeholders that contribute towards that, but we're seeing injury rates increase as number of games increase. So the answer has to be yes. You know, the more races you do, the more exposure to risk, and you'll probably find there'll be a sweet spot for you. So I think it's saying to yourself, right, I'm going to look at this again long term. We're going to look at 3 to 5 years, and we're going to find what that perfect exposure to risk is, and it's all on monitoring. You know, the performances will take care of themselves, but I use a monitor like Whoop.
Yep.
or a Ring, and that tells me how well I'm recovered.
Yep.
And I think if you look at one race calendar compared to the next and compare your recovery and performance year on year, you'll find something that suits you.
Yeah. And things like with the sort of using heart rate variability and other kind of stats, isn't it, to try and give you an overall score. But I guess all athletes can look at lots of other signs, isn't it? For example, you know, what's their sleep like? What are their energy levels like? What are they finding in terms of their motivation even to train again? Often these can be signals that you're overtraining and potentially got too much sort of racing, you know, competition within your schedule.
Yeah, and I think you can be, you know, as an amateur athlete, you can be really over-focused on performance.
Yep.
And become unstuck. And you can probably get away with improving your performance year on year, but then have a really bad third year because you haven't respected the fact that your body needs to recover. So being really knowledgeable about your body and how it reacts, I think is the absolute important thing. And we've got tools out there now. If I think about elite sports medicine 10 years ago, we weren't doing any monitoring at all, and we were just looking at self-reporting. Now we've got Whoop, we've got Garmin, we've got all these different monitors that we can use to help predict your readiness to train. And I think if you respect that and use that, you can build a race calendar for yourself.
One thing that I found often with age groupers is that we constantly want to put in work, don't we? We want to put in work to improve and perform. And it can be quite difficult when you're having, let's say, those weeks where it isn't as intense and you're allowing that recovery to sort of mentally feel like you're moving forwards because it feels like you're doing less. And do you have any sort of tips on how people could approach those weeks, maybe being a bit more purposeful with them, other things that they can work on that isn't intensity so they still feel like they're moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, the classic for the amateur or semi-professional athlete is the overtrain. Because they don't have the time to train effectively. They pinch time from recovery, nutrition, sleep, because they have busy lives. Classically, an age grouper, they're going to have a couple of children, wife, successful in their work. So something has to give, and normally that's your health and well-being. You just about get your training in, but it's really difficult to find a balance. The mantra I use, I have a business, I have a wife, 2 children, and I train for Ironmans. I always train on feel. So we've just talked about, you know, monitoring devices and everything else. But some of the best athletes I've worked with, they always, if in doubt, leave it out.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that have been most successful. And success in your training and life is about consistency. And so if there's any doubt with your readiness to train, then take a day off. I think it's having that discipline. It's easy to go out there and train. If you're an age grouper, triathlete, you don't need someone, you're not going to see a PT, you don't necessarily need a coach to tell you to go out and do it. You're very highly motivated, but your weakness probably is your lack of time and discipline. And I think it's a discipline required to get consistency in your training. And unfortunately, if you overload yourself, you then get injured, you then start to lose conditioning, and it goes on.
Yeah, because I think that's paramount, isn't it? Because often when they're not training, they're still stressing the body out in one way or another, whether it's work or daily admin. And so they've got to realise that they have to be purposeful in their recovery just as much as when it's purposeful in putting the hard work in, for example, those tough interval sessions. And something that I often try to recommend is to give themselves a focus. So yes, maybe they've reduced intensity when they're periodizing and they're getting those weeks down. But instead, we need to think about, kind of what can we do to enable them to have something. So for example, you mentioned sort of stretching, you mentioned how they can improve their mobility, that kind of thing. So instead, it gives them something, isn't it, to be actively doing. So they feel when they are trying to fit it in, they're still moving forward, but they're getting the performance gains as well, which I think is really good.
I think making it part of their lifestyle. So, the biggest thing that I see in clinic that I think contributes to injury and illness is a sedentary life. Yep. A lot of the people, these age groupers we're talking about, they'll sit for prolonged periods of time. So the great thing about, recovery is it's zone 1 exercise. So take the stairs rather than the lift, park, 20 minutes walk from where you work and walk in. Try and add the odd stretch in at your desk. In clinic,
building in movement, isn't it? Re-engineering movement just into their daily life. It doesn't have to be in your cycling jersey. It can be just every day, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's undoing the effects of people are trying to undo the effects of a sedentary life by being a triathlete. And actually, probably the best bang for your buck is trying to undo the effects of your working life through your day. And having a healthy lifestyle where you take walking meetings rather than sit at a desk and meet, where you have your flask of water, so that one of the biggest risks of injury, lack of hydration, and people are drinking perhaps too much coffee and tea, and they should be hydrating regularly through the day, setting reminders on their device, to remind them to get up and stand. Exactly. I think rather than I think people are time poor. So rather than saying, right, you've now got to get in the gym and do a mobility session, have a stretch band at work, have a foam roller that you can lean against the wall and use, you're more likely to do that consistently, particularly if you're time poor.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, isn't it? And that's something that is very achievable, and also it's much longer in terms of hours in your week. If you think about, if you make changes there, that's going to impact a whole number of hours compared to the 10 to 15 hours that on average most sort of age groupers will train in specific sessions. So no, very good. Cool. So next question is from Lewis, and he wants to know, how can athletes help themselves by adding recovery time into each day, and how much is a good amount of time to add for recovery?
Well, in the elite setting, after training and matches, there'll be a period of time that they devote to recovery, and it will. The type of recovery will depend on the type of session. So if there's a session that you've got that's obviously higher than normal in mileage, so your long run on the weekend, or your speed running session or hill session in the week, where there's going to be a lot of ground reaction force, then I'd devote recovery to those sessions rather than your zone 1, zone 2 spin. And the type of recovery that you should probably focus on is immediately after that exercise, compression. Because compression, there's great evidence that your vessels don't vasodilate as much, so you don't get blood pooling, so you don't get the effect of DOMS as much. And so we can use calf sleeves, we can use compression leggings, and a lot of elite athletes will sleep in those. I just get tight calves all the time because they're in a state of fatigue. They're in constant spasm because they're finding it difficult to do what you're asking them to do. So if there's a body part, I'd focus on your calves and your foot and ankle mobility for running. And then, running is probably the exercise we associate most with lower limb injury. And then with swimming, as you're building your volume, it's more shoulders and neck. And then with cycling, again, if you're doing prolonged positions in a time trial position, then again, shoulders and neck. So depending on what you're doing in the session will depend on where you focus your recovery.
Okay. And is there a role for ice and sort of cold therapy for that recovery element?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of evidence that compression and ice are a lot better than compression or ice on their own.
Okay, yeah.
So we know that cold temperatures causes vasoconstriction, so the vessels decrease in their diameter, and that causes vascular shunt, and that moves waste products. So ice compression devices are useful. The problem is a lot of them require faffing about with ice from the freezer and everything else.
Yeah.
So, I use the Riixo sleeves for my calves, particularly after a run, where I'm increasing my mileage. So my long run, I'll use the Riixo compression calf sleeves. And I find that doing that regularly, consistently, means that my calves aren't as tight as the mileage builds up. And I use compression sleeves when I run.
Brilliant. And I think that's the key, because like you're having the recovery, but it's just giving you that sort of shorter window to eventually be able to recommence training properly. Because often what many people will find is they do a tough session and then they try to push. And yes, of course you can do movement, but you just don't quite feel the same. Your heart rate's going higher than you normally expect. You're not quite able to sort of match the same power or speed that you would normally do. And I think like what you're doing is just delaying that recovery, isn't it? You're not allowing that healing to happen, your body to adapt and to be able to come back stronger. So, really good points. Thank you. Now, Liam has asked around, for example, what accommodations should be made within your training and within your racing to help to prevent recurrent infections? Because what he's noticed is that he feels like his immune system has been sort of dampened when he's doing really high load, and he gets sort of a lot of viral infections, which I think is something that I've definitely heard from a lot of the people that I sort of treat and interact with within the age group community. What are your thoughts there around kind of what else can be done to prevent the immune system from being sort of dampened during a really tough effort?
Well, I can speak from personal experience, and I ended up seeing a sports medicine consultant, and they specialise in overtraining and underperformance with elite athletes. And I was diagnosed with vitamin D deficiency, and vitamin D, from my learning, is the thing that boosts your immune system. And if you're overtraining and perhaps you're not devoting enough time to rest and recovery, maybe you're not getting enough hours sleep, and if you live in Great Britain and there's less sunshine, a common trait with the age groupers that I see in clinic are they're underperforming because they're overtraining and they're getting ill. And the question the doctor asked me was, do you get more than 4 or 5 colds a year, and do you wake up feeling tired each morning? It takes you a while to get going, and I answered yes to all of those, and we had a blood test and my vitamin D levels were on the floor, and I immediately felt better from supplementing with vitamin D. I was also recommended to take zinc and magnesium, which are really important for muscle soft tissue repair. And when we're training and when we're exercising, we're loading our muscles to overload them and cause microscopic damage. That's the muscle soreness that we feel. And that's in an elite setting what we chase. And if you've got muscle soreness, that's great, because providing you recover properly, you're going to get growth, you're going to get repair, you're going to get an improvement in fitness and strength. But if you don't recover and you don't replace what you've injured, by supplementation, then gradually over a period of time, then your health can decline. So it's all about supplementation with the right vitamins, and seeing a dietitian probably that specialises in sport is useful. But fundamentally, hydrating well, vitamin D, and being mindful. I also used to make the classic mistake where I used to train ill and not give myself enough time to recover from an infection before I trained again. And that's, again, discipline. I knew that I shouldn't probably. A lot of people say, oh, you can run through a cold and it clears your airways. But actually what you're doing is you're taking the energy from your immune system to supply those muscles, and therefore not giving your immune system the energy required to recover from the infection.
Precisely. It's that how the body spreads out the energy, isn't it? So when you're doing really, really heavy training, other things will be impacted if it's not being refueled correctly, isn't it? And in lifestyle medicine where we work, we often sort of talk about 6 key pillars, with obviously physical activity being key, and how you do that stress, recover, repeat, which is just so essential if you actually want to get progress. But then in the nutrition elements, we really got to be fundamental in what we're having. We want as much whole food rather than ultra processed food, because a lot of these whole food, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, they contain a lot of, for example, the zinc, the magnesium, the vitamin D, that can be really helpful to mean that you've got as much as possible to allow you to have as high a training load while not sacrificing other body systems, for example, the immune system. Even things like sleep, even having good high quality sleep, that can be like doing a training session in a way, because if you're having high quality sleep, your body's able to do the processes of repair just that much better. So really think about those. Those are sort of 3 of the 6 pillars. The final 3 includes minimizing harmful substances. So really being careful with, the alcohol that you drink, being careful in terms of smoking and other substances that may be causing a negative impact on the body. And then the final 2 is around mental well-being, because we know that being mentally stressed and to having those kind of pressures on you, the body reacts very negatively to that, and it will inhibit your performance from that sense. The final is healthy relationships, really having a good relationship, not just to those around you, but with work, trying to have that balance, because I think that's really important. If you're doing everything to 100%, something's got to give, doesn't it? You can't do everything like that. Thank you for that answer. Now, Tom was wondering if there are, in particular when it comes to injury prevention, and if we focus on the lower leg, the calves, are there any specific exercises that you would recommend to try to prevent someone from getting, whether that be calf strains, tears, or any kind of the lower leg injuries?
Yeah, but I mean, below knee injuries is really, really common. Achilles, calf, arch and heel pain in people that run on the roads. And age group, as you get older, your soft tissue quality reduces, as does your strength. There's a great study that I always talk about in clinic, which is military recruits in America. And what they found was that 80% of the people who got a lower limb injury below the knee, 80% of those had a weak hip above. And I always think of the hip as a shock absorber. And I see people in clinic all the time. The first thing I do is measure their hip strength. And usually, if they've got a lower limb injury on that side, they have a weak hip above. And I think it's very easy to focus on the symptomatic calf and treat the tightness with soft tissue, stretching, and we should do all those things. But I often, what gets missed, and when people come and see me who've had treatment elsewhere, again, this long-term approach is about looking above and below the injury, and ankle mobility and balance and hip strength are really key, I think, for avoiding and recovering from these recurrent calf injuries. The other bit of interesting knowledge we've gained and the lessons we've learned in elite sport, a lot of people who have calf and hamstring problems, the nerves that supply the calves originate from your spine.
Yep.
And the lower part of your back, because of what we do all day, sitting, stiffness in their back, tightness in their hip flexors associated with prolonged sitting. I see that as a real big risk factor for nerve irritation. In the elite setting, I know that there are organisations that will treat the back and spine regularly, and their calf injuries have come down over a 3-year period. So I think it's really, really important, obviously, to treat the injury, and we've got various different strategies for that. But I think, having, again, focusing on our sedentary lifestyle, undo the effects of sitting and stiffness that we get from lack of movement. So ankle mobility and stretching, and hip strengthening and back strengthening, I think, in the gym are a great way to make our body more robust and better at absorbing shock. And I think if we're better at absorbing shock, our calves are less likely to be overloaded.
Fair enough, because I think it's all connected. Like, as you say, you can't just focus just on one thing. It's unlikely to be just a specific issue. And in terms of hip strengthening, what would you say would be kind of the best thing to do in the gym if someone's just starting off? What would be the sort of first exercise to try?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think if you're just starting off, the most important thing is to not go to the internet. And I see loads of people that haven't sought the advice of a professional in the gym. Loads of people who get injured in the gym, watching on the internet really fit people doing exercises and then try and do them themselves. Fundamentally, runners have to be strong with one foot in front of another. So we always, as a physio, prescribe exercises like that. So a lunge, a step up, a split squat, they're the foundation of lower limb unilateral strengthening. But the devil, as always, is in the detail. So get a professional to watch you do them, video you doing them and watch it back, because what you think you're doing and what you've seen someone else doing might not be what you're actually doing. And the mirrors in the gym are there for a reason. So focus on good, efficient movement that's safe. But I would definitely look at step up, split squat and lunge as key exercises to make you more robust as a runner.
Brilliant, thank you, very useful. And are there, so sticking to kind of drills and exercises, Anna is asking around, are there any drills you'd recommend before harder, more physically demanding training sessions that would help to reduce the risk of injuries? What kind of pre-exercise warm-up would you recommend?
Well, we see a lot of people who are strong, have good mobility, they've done a great job undoing the effects of sitting, but when you put intensity into any program, what you're asking the body is to absorb shock. So I think to ready the body for that impact, it's when you run, when you sprint, when you're at your top speed, you're needing to deal with your body weight at foot strike in 0.8 of a millisecond. And when you're sprinting, it's 8 times your body weight that goes through your leg as it hits the ground at mid-starts. So to prepare the body for that, and in the elite setting, you see them all warming up, doing landing drills and foot mechanics. And I think that's a really great, any athletics coach or run coach would teach you running drills to do. And now there are loads of examples of that on the internet that you can look at. But I always teach exercises, bounding exercises, skipping drills, and jumping and landing from a box. And I think that's a great way. There's more and more evidence now that passive stretching that we used to do in PE when we were kids actually doesn't bear any relationship with injury reduction. But getting the tendons and muscles ready to absorb force are probably something that should probably be focused on before the impact starts. So running-based drills and jumping and landing, once you're warm, are probably a really useful way to get the body ready for the shock of impact.
Brilliant, thank you. If I could move on to a question by Siobhan, which is how to recover as quickly as possible to allow time to train during a busy race period, to preventing it from just becoming a similar sort of taper race recover without any training. So it was a similar question to one of the other age groupers that we had. And I guess, I think if I could refine the question and say, when we're doing taper, if you do have a really busy schedule, should you vary your taper? Because a lot of people do a 2 or 3 week taper before an event, but if you have a lot in the calendar, can you get away with shorter tapers? How would you think about approaching that?
Well, I think it depends on your event. So if you're doing Ironman distance, it's a minimum of 2 weeks. But that doesn't mean total rest. It means healthy movement. And it means all the things we've been talking about. You know, if you did nothing, then your hip flexors get tight, your backs get stiff, your ankles get stiff. So, and your body will, over a 2 week period, forget how to absorb shock. So we need to keep active. But if you're not doing an Ironman, and you're recovering from a normal triathlon, then I would think a deload week, providing you've structured rest and recovery in your pre-season and everything else, then a week of deload is enough. And you know, again, you can use useful monitoring strategies with heart rate variability and sleep quality, but I would think a week is more than enough, and less than that, providing your recovery parameters are observed.
And it often depends on your particular physiology and training position, isn't it? Because some people can recover quite quickly, others it takes longer. I think it's really important is that if you do not feel recovered, then you really should maybe consider about whether this calendar should have a few races pulled out of it. Because if you're going into races and you're already shattered before they even started the start line, which I have had with a number of my compatriots, you've got to wonder, like, the risk that you're taking in getting an injury is just much higher if you're going to start a competition already feeling achy and tired and fatigued.
I think if you look at the race calendar of a professional, and then if you're doing, you know, half what they're doing, and you're not a professional, and you're not getting that level of recovery, you're probably running risk, aren't you? So I'd be looking to, you know, as you say, you have to make compromises somewhere, and maybe, you know, focusing on certain races and reducing that volume is the key thing. You know, the biggest predictor of injury is exposure. So, you know, you can do as much recovery as you want, but if your goal is to improve your performance, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do more races. And that old adage of less is more, I think, probably stands well here.
And I understand that you're training for an Ironman at the moment, is that correct? Yeah,
I've got Nice Ironman in 3 weeks.
Oh, fantastic. How are you feeling?
Well, I'm not tapering yet. So the last week, I'm in the last week before the taper. So I feel tired and sore and stiff. And I think, this is the time where you're doing, probably your long ride is 95 miles, and you're doing 3-hour runs, and you get my day off is Monday, but like this week I've done enough training, so I've had quite a quiet week. I'll do a long ride on Saturday, another 95 miles. Nice has 8,000 feet of climbing. It's an hour on your bike, and then it's a 40-mile hill. So I've tried to replicate that in my training as much as I can, but I live in Cheshire. So, I've had to get out into Buxton, and this weekend we're going to Snowdonia. So I'll chase around the hills there. But really, the feeling is, but if you haven't done enough now, then, you've run out of time. So, I'll get some long rides and a long run in. And then, the following week, just start to deload.
And I think that's so important, because that whole analogy that I try to give to athletes I support is that kind of the hay's in the barn at this point. Like, there's not much else you can do. All you can do in that 2 weeks is potentially cause damage. If, for example, you're trying to think that, okay, I haven't quite got myself in the right place. In fact, you're going to reduce your competitiveness if you try to bring in a load in those 2 weeks, because your body just will not adapt in time. You'll probably be peaking 2 or 3 weeks after the race rather than that event. So sometimes you have to know that, okay, at this point, the best thing I can do is start that recovery and accelerate that bit. And you mentioned there kind of a number of the tips for age groupers. How has it been for yourself as an athlete? Have you ever been tempted to not listen to your own advice and your own profession, because then suddenly you've got the different hat on, your sort of athlete hat on?
Yeah, I mean, life takes over, doesn't it? And it is only advice. And that, I think, I can empathise really well with a lot of my patients, because sometimes I am the worst patient, and I've sat in front of a sports medicine doctor and went, I probably don't. And the dietitian that works with me, I'm really lucky because of the people I employ and the people I work with. I get a lot of support, but you can be told everything and you can have all the knowledge, but executing it. But I'm pretty relaxed now. I'm 45 and, I know that I'm not going to hit every week perfectly in training, and I'm not going to, my goal maybe is to represent GB by the time I'm 50.
Brilliant.
But to achieve that goal, I know what I need is consistently to be healthy every year, rather than smash an Ironman time and then be injured for 3 months afterwards. So I think it is about discipline, but just being accepting that we have busy lives and we're very fortunate to be healthy and be able to ride a bike for that distance, but respect my body, I guess, and listen to it. I'm the same as everybody else, even with the knowledge and experience I've got. Executing things sometimes and listening to your own advice is difficult, as you probably know as well.
100%. Definitely, as both a coach and an athlete, like the amount of times my wife would say, "What would you tell one of your athletes?" I'm like, "No, I would not be doing this right now." And I think that's why I sympathise so much with why athletes will often make these kind of mistakes, which, yes, as a professional, that's a clear mistake. But then when you're an athlete, you're striving, isn't it? You're striving to just do everything you can to squeeze that little bit more, to get that more performance out. And in reality is, you may even know deep down in your head that this probably isn't the best idea, but we often need those outlets. And I think that's why I'd recommend sort of seeing professionals like yourself and coaches. And for example, I am coached. I coach others and I have coaching myself because I needed someone to be able to tell me, like saying, actually, you need to think about, reducing this or including this. Because sometimes you need that external validation in a way, sometimes just to give you permission to be like, maybe you shouldn't be at 100% all of the time.
Absolutely. I mean, you're only as good as the team around you. And that's what we've learned, in elite sport, marginal gains and all these things. But there is a big network of people. And sometimes we're human beings, our behaviour has to be managed by others. Having, my wife and children that roll their eyes sometimes is enough, as well as all these professionals that we tap into when we need to.
Yeah. And I think you also touched on the fact that you want to do this sort of over the long term. And I think that can sometimes be the danger, is I can see people really go all in, can often destroy themselves because they've just been focusing so hard and trying to squeeze everything out. They don't get the longevity. They pick up injuries that can impact them longer term and actually stop them from, for example, being able to run consistently and being able to enjoy what they do. And I think that's so important, isn't it? That they think of the longevity, no matter kind of what the focus is. It's not about just getting that one time. It's about how can I enjoy movement and physical activity and that strength for a long period of time, isn't it?
100%. And they're the people that I see in clinic classically that are frustrated with themselves. They've thrown their life at their career, very much family orientated, and maybe let themselves go over their 30s, 40s, and now they're using the sport as a way to motivate themselves. And they have sometimes unrealistic expectations of what their body will do. And they're the ones, that unfortunately end up with quite a serious injury and maybe having surgery as a result. So I think it's more about, taking a long-term approach. We know that, the relationship between movement and health is so important. And triathlon is fantastic because you can, cycling and swimming is off feet, very little impact, and contributes really well complements the effect of running. So.
And that's kind of where I moved, because I originally kind of pretty much focused all my time in running, and it was only when I picked up a number of injuries running that I included that as part of my rehab to sort of cross-train and keep the fitness up. And then kind of I realised that it just allowed me that better balance, that I could work on a lot of my performance in terms of fitness in those other disciplines and not needing to be on my feet as much. I still do plenty of running, but my load is less and I'm still performing better in my running because I'm able to have a number of different disciplines. And I think it also gives you the opportunity to develop a body longer term that is healthy, because you can strengthen other areas, which is so important as we get older and we want to still be doing the things we love when we're 60, 70, 80. That involves training all your muscles, not just your lower legs. So I think triathlon can be a great mechanism to do that, combining it with strength training and mobility. Those are kind of your core concepts. That means that you're able to continue to do the things you love. But that is that fine line of, if you overdo it, get a serious long-term injury, and that takes you off the wagon of continued safe training, then suddenly you'll see the effects of sedentary activity.
I think that's the key, and you said it, strength and conditioning, that will give you that foundation of longevity. And it's when you pick apart, people, they recount an injury, their training was going well, and you talk about, well, let's measure your strength, and the number of people that don't work on their spinal, abdominal stability and leg strength, and they're the shock absorbers of the body. And that's all I do really in clinic. A lot of the time it's just about saying, well, look, you sit down a lot. I don't treat landscape gardeners or people who dig the roads. I treat people who sit down for a living.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm sort of passionate about. And they're undoing the effect of that using triathlon. But the number of triathletes that become unstuck because they don't do any strength in the gym, I would say, is the vast majority.
Yeah, it's so important, that combination of removing as much sedentary activity as possible and combining it with strength training gives you that framework, isn't it? It's like, for example, if you had if you're trying to build a really fast car, you could put a massive engine in it, but if the chassis is not able to cope with the input that's going through, you'll get breaks, you'll get AKA the injuries. So you have to work on those elements. And I think the sort of that sedentary element is something that's really common amongst age groupers, because we have busy jobs and busy lives. And I guess it's about thinking, how can you break it up, making small steps? You already touched on, for example, parking further away from work, including a walk here and there. Things like standing desks can be helpful. You also mentioned about that walking meeting. Often I get a lot of phone calls, and as soon as I get the phone call, fine, I've got a 20-minute phone call that I've got to do with someone, but I'll just be moving around. Because there's no need, they don't know if I'm sit down or not, so I often just go moving around my practice, just staying active. For example, I work in a surgery, and so I'll get patients to go into the downstairs waiting rooms, that whenever I call them in, I go downstairs, because I'm in the first floor, bring them upstairs. I do that every single time for every patient, and then that means I'm doing the staircase, nearly sort of 40 to 50 times in a day, and that just breaks it up. Because otherwise, if I'm stuck in my room and I just press the buzzer for, come into Dr. Hussain's room, that's 8-9 hours of being sat down. And no matter what I do in the evening with, let's say, a 2-hour ride or whatever, it won't really replace or fix that sort of sedentary. You can become like an active couch potato, essentially.
Yeah, I think there's that great statistic that if you stand for 2 hours longer every day, that's the equivalent to running 20 marathons a year. So, as I say, I don't treat a lot of people that stand for a living. I treat a lot of people that sit, and it's really easy to get into that routine where you lose yourself in front of your work, in front of your screen. And so I think that is key. I think it's key to your body learning how to mobilize fats. It's key to not getting stiff and getting imbalances and biomechanical inefficiencies as a result. And I think we know it. And so what we do to compensate is we train harder. And you look at people with diabetes and cardiovascular disease, unfortunately, going to the gym regularly doesn't decrease your risk. What decreases your risk is having a healthy, active lifestyle. And so that's choosing your walking holiday rather than your sun lounger by the pool. And it's, regularly walking to work and using the stairs and choosing, being more active than perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. We often focus on sort of these sexy sessions to think that that's going to do everything, but in the sort of passage of time, they are tiny bits. Yeah. It's what are you doing for the vast majority of the time? That's what's going to have an impact, isn't it? That's what the body's going to be looking at. And when you're working with elite athletes, is there a different kind of mentality there and other issues that you need to manage that are different to, let's say, your age grouper that's trying to burn, candles at both ends? Do you have other challenges that you think would be interesting to share?
I think in the elite setting, again, they're all very individual. My experience working with Red Bull, a lot of them don't go to the gym, don't do any recovery. Some of these athletes are BMXers, motocross riders. They were the kids at the back of class that didn't listen. Yeah. They didn't get any qualifications, but they loved riding BMX. Yeah. And they were the best in the world. And they got a night contract when they were 17 to do it and become, richer than the wildest dreams. And so getting on to their level, getting respect from them. I'm an academic. I respect science. I understand the importance of strength and conditioning. And so everyone associates elite sport with, they're very disciplined, they're very driven, and some of them just happen to be really good at what they do. Yeah. And they don't do anything in the gym and they don't do any recovery. And that was a big lesson for me. That's why I love working for Red Bull, because a lot of them aren't the standard athlete. So I've learned a lot from that. And then, in the elite setting, again, their motivations and the reason they're doing the sport is very different. They get paid to do it. Yeah. And they get pulled pillar and post by lots of different stakeholders. That comes with its challenges. And I've dealt now with lots and lots of retired athletes where they've lived in this professional sport bubble, and they retire with only they're almost addicted to that competition, that race, that achievement. That success.
It's a structure, isn't it? Because the kind of weeks are planned out, and then suddenly when there isn't that focus, trying to apply that structure is more of a challenge. It's not impossible, and I think you can still structure your life and include training no matter who you are, but it is challenging, isn't it, when it's all encompassing, all about them and that structure. Suddenly lose that when you retire, it must be very difficult.
Very, very difficult. And in the elite setting, you're sort of trusting the network and you're told what you do. We stand in an airport. Because I worked 7 days a week, I'd never really go on holiday or travel much. And I just remember my first family holiday, and I was having to manage the kids with their boarding passes in the airport, and years and years of the team manager would give you a boarding ticket, and you'd stand there, and your bags would be loaded, and you never did anything for yourself. So you didn't have those life skills that you need. Yeah. And so the challenges are different in elite sport, but they're sometimes as serious, if not more. I think there's a lot of things we can learn, and the professional athletes can learn from the people who work and live normal lives as well. There's interesting comparisons, but it's not what you think sometimes in elite sport. They're not as motivated as you might think. They're not as knowledgeable. They just happen to be really, really good, very, very talented. I've worked with world-class teams, and often a lot of them work extremely hard, and the ones that make it sometimes aren't the most talented either. But I think to get to the highest level, you've got to have the talent, the work ethic, and a bit of luck.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you to everyone that submitted questions for Doug and myself. I hope you found the session really useful. And just before we close, kind of 3 key points that you'd like to share with us, or some take-homes?
Yeah, I think what's come out of our discussion and the really brilliant questions that we had, I'd summarise in 3 things. I'd say the first one would be to set SMART goals, so something specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timed. And that might be, I'm going to complete an Ironman in a certain distance, but it's unrealistic to do it in your first year, The next one would be to have an important metric that you find works for you. That might just be your perceived exertion, how tired you feel, or you might prefer to have a Whoop band tell you what your heart rate variability is. And lastly, I would say, structuring recovery into your lifestyle. That would be my third thing, where, we're busy enough, aren't we?
Yeah. We can't just jump in an ice bath.
Exactly, yeah. So, wearing a garment that compresses, that you can wear, overnight, or using a compression sleeve, or, having something that you find really helps, but isn't, we're all time poor, isn't a faff to use, and that consistency is key.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Doug. Really helpful. I've learnt a great deal. I hope you've enjoyed the questions, and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks very much.